I never questioned why there were always 6 chairs around our dining table when we were only 5. Mom, Dad, my 2 sisters Sarah and Emma, and me. That should have been 5 chairs, not 6. But that extra chair sat there every single day of my childhood, perfectly positioned, never used, never even acknowledged. It wasn't until I turned 23 and was helping my parents clean out the attic for their move to Florida that I found the box. A simple cardboard box, tucked behind Christmas decorations that hadn't seen daylight in years. Inside, I discovered photographs that made my blood run cold. There I was, age 7, standing next to a boy who looked exactly like me. Same dark hair, same green eyes, same crooked smile. In another photo, we were blowing out candles on what appeared to be a shared birthday cake. 2 boys, clearly twins, surrounded by our family. But here's the thing that made my hands shake as I held those pictures. I had no memory of this boy. None whatsoever. Mom. I called downstairs, my voice cracking with confusion. Who is this? The silence that followed was deafening. I heard Dad's newspaper rustle, then stop entirely. Footsteps on the stairs, slow and deliberate. When my mother appeared in the attic doorway, her face had drained of all color. "Where did you find that?" she whispered, her eyes locked on the photograph in my trembling hands. "In this box." "Mom, who is this kid? Why do I not remember him? Why does he look exactly like me?" My father's heavy footsteps joined us in the cramped attic space. When he saw what I was holding, he closed his eyes and let out a long, shuddering breath. "We need to talk," he said quietly. "All of us. Downstairs." As we gathered around that dining table, with its 6 chairs, I noticed something I'd never seen before. My parents kept glancing at that empty 6th chair, and for the first time in my life, I realized it wasn't empty by accident. It was being saved for someone. Someone who should have been there but wasn't. "His name was Michael," my mother began, her voice barely above a whisper. "He was your twin brother." The word was hit me like a physical blow. Twin brother. Past tense. I had a twin brother, and he was gone, and somehow, impossibly, I had no memory of him whatsoever. "You're lying." The words escaped my lips before I could stop them. I would remember having a twin brother. People don't just forget their twin. My mother's eyes filled with tears she'd been holding back for 16 years. "You were both so young when it happened. Only 7. The doctors said it was possible, especially given the trauma." "What trauma?" I demanded, my voice rising. "What happened to Michael?" Dad cleared his throat, his weathered hands clasping and unclasping on the table. "There was an accident. A terrible accident at the lake house. We used to rent that place every summer, remember? You loved swimming in that lake." I did remember the lake house. Vaguely. Fragments of memories involving rope swings and catching fireflies and the smell of my mother's sunscreen. But in all those memories, I was alone. Just me, my parents, and my sisters. "Michael was always the braver one," Mom continued, her voice growing stronger now that the secret was finally spilling out. "While you were cautious, methodical, he was impulsive. Fearless. That day, he decided to swim out to the floating dock while you stayed on the shore, building sandcastles." Sarah, my older sister, spoke up for the first time. "I remember that day. You were screaming his name from the beach. You kept pointing at the water, crying, but by the time Dad dove in..." "That's enough," Dad said sharply, but Sarah continued. "Michael had gotten caught in the underwater weeds near the dock. Dad pulled him out, started CPR, but it was too late. You watched the whole thing, Danny. You saw your twin brother drown." The room spun around me. I gripped the edge of the table, trying to process this information. A twin brother. Dead at 7. And I had watched it happen. "The doctors said you suffered what they called dissociative amnesia," Mom explained. "Your mind simply erased the trauma to protect itself. At first, you would wake up screaming his name, looking for him in your room, setting a place for him at breakfast. But gradually, over the course of about a year, you stopped mentioning him altogether. We thought it was a blessing, Dad added quietly. That you could move on, live a normal life without carrying that burden. But we couldn't forget, Emma said, speaking up from the corner where she'd been silently crying. None of us could. Every birthday, every Christmas, every family photo, we all felt his absence. That's why we kept the chair. I stared at that empty sixth chair, and suddenly, like a dam breaking, fragments began flooding back. Not clear memories, but feelings. The sensation of someone always being beside me. The feeling of incompleteness I'd carried my entire life, never understanding why I felt like something was missing. Show me, I said hoarsely. Show me everything. The basement became our archaeological dig site as my family unearthed 16 years of hidden history. Boxes and boxes of Michael's belongings, carefully preserved and stored away like artifacts from a lost civilization. His clothes, his toys, his artwork from kindergarten and first grade, everything a 7-year-old boy would have owned, frozen in time. What struck me most was how different we were, despite being identical twins. My childhood artwork was always neat, organized, careful. Michael's was explosive, wild colors outside the lines, creative chaos that somehow worked perfectly. I found a finger painting we'd made together. My side was a careful landscape with a house, trees, and a sun in the corner. His side was an abstract swirl of every color imaginable, beautiful in its complete disregard for convention. You two were like two halves of the same person, Mom said, sitting cross-legged on the basement floor, surrounded by memory boxes. You balanced each other perfectly. Michael would come up with these wild, impossible ideas, and you would figure out how to make them work. She pulled out a construction paper airplane, held together with what looked like an entire roll of tape. This was one of his designs. He insisted it would fly to the moon if you just added enough tape. You spent an entire afternoon helping him build it, even though you knew it was impossible. Did it fly? I asked. Straight into Mrs. Henderson's rosebushes next door, Dad chuckled, the first time I'd heard him laugh since this conversation began. But you both thought it was the greatest success in aviation history. Emma produced a notebook filled with elaborate crayon drawings. You two created this whole fantasy world together. The kingdom of Michael Danny, one word, because you insisted you couldn't have a kingdom with just one king. I flipped through the pages, seeing evidence of collaborative imagination I couldn't remember. Maps of imaginary lands, drawings of fantastic creatures, detailed plans for tree forts and underground tunnels. In every picture, there were two stick figures, always together, always smiling. Why did you hide all of this from me? I asked. For 16 years, why didn't anyone ever mention his name? The room fell silent. Finally, Sarah answered. Because you seemed so happy. For the first time since the accident, you were sleeping through the night, playing with friends, laughing again. We were afraid that if we reminded you about Michael, you'd fall back into that dark place. What dark place? After the accident, you barely spoke for months, Mom explained. You would sit in your room, talking to someone who wasn't there, saving half your food for him, insisting he was just invisible. The child psychologist said forcing you to confront the reality might make it worse. I found a photograph of the two of us on our 7th birthday, our last birthday together. We were wearing matching superhero costumes, capes flowing behind us as we posed with our arms crossed, trying to look tough. But what caught my attention was something in the background, a birthday cake with 7 candles, and written in blue frosting were the words, "Happy birthday Michael and Danny, dynamic duo forever." Dynamic duo, I whispered, and suddenly I could almost hear an echo of a voice identical to mine, saying those words with 7-year-old enthusiasm. That's what you called yourselves, Dad said softly. Michael came up with it after watching Batman reruns. He said twins were like superheroes, twice as strong when they worked together. As the afternoon wore on, my family painted a picture of a childhood I'd lost. Michael the dreamer, me the planner. Michael the performer, me the audience. Michael the leader, me the loyal follower. We were inseparable, they said. Two parts of the same whole. But there was something else, something I could see in their eyes when they thought I wasn't looking. A hesitation, a shared glance between my parents that suggested there was more to this story. Something they still weren't telling me. There's something else, isn't there? I finally asked. Something you're not saying. The silence stretched on for so long, I thought they might not answer. Then Mom looked at Dad, who nodded slowly. There's something else you need to know about that day at the lake, she said. Something about why Michael went swimming alone. You have to understand, Mom began, her voice shaking. You were both just children. 7 years old. You couldn't have known. Known what? I pressed, but I was beginning to feel a cold dread creeping up my spine. Dad took over, his voice steady but pained. That morning at the lake, you boys had been arguing about something silly. Who got to use the red inner tube first, I think. Michael wanted to swim out to the floating dock, and you said it was too far, too dangerous. You were always the cautious one. Sarah added quietly, Michael got frustrated and said he was going to prove you wrong. That he was brave enough to swim anywhere. But that's not why he went swimming, Emma interrupted, and everyone turned to stare at her. She looked at me with tears streaming down her face. Tell him the real reason, Mom. Tell him what Danny said. The basement seemed to shrink around us. My mother's face crumpled, and I knew whatever came next would change everything. You dared him, she whispered. You got angry because he called you a scaredy cat, and you dared him to swim to the dock alone. The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt the blood drain from my face as the implication sank in. You said. Dad's voice broke. You said if he was so brave, he should prove it. That if he could swim to the dock and back without help, you'd admit he was the braver twin. No, I breathed. No, that can't be right. I wouldn't. I would never. You were 7, Mom said firmly. You were angry, and you were 7 years old. Children say things they don't mean when they're upset. But I could see it in their faces, the guilt they'd all been carrying. Not just grief for Michael, but the terrible knowledge that his death hadn't been a random accident. It had been the result of a childhood dare gone tragically wrong. That's why you blocked it out, Sarah said softly. The trauma wasn't just watching Michael drown. It was knowing that you were the reason he was in the water in the first place. I stood up so quickly my chair fell backward, crashing to the basement floor. I killed him. The words came out as barely a whisper. I killed my twin brother. No. Mom jumped up, grabbing my shoulders. No, Danny. It was an accident. Michael made his own choice to swim out there. You were both children. But the pieces were falling into place now, like a horrific jigsaw puzzle. The empty chair at our table wasn't just memorial. It was penance. My family hadn't erased Michael from our history to help me heal. They'd done it to protect me from the truth of what I'd done. All these years, I said, pulling away from her. All these years you've been looking at me and thinking about how I killed him. That's not true, Dad said, but his voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? Every birthday, every Christmas, every time you looked at me, you saw the son who lived and remembered the son who died because of what I said. Emma was sobbing now. We love you, Danny. We've always loved you. Yes, we think about Michael every day, but we never blamed you. Never. But you blamed yourselves for not stopping me from making that dare, I said, the full truth crystallizing in my mind. That's why you hid everything. Not to protect me from grief, but to protect me from guilt. And to protect yourselves from having to face what happened every day. The silence that followed was deafening. In that moment, I understood why the 6th chair had always been there. It wasn't love that kept Michael's place at our table. It was guilt. Collective, crushing guilt that had shaped our family's entire dynamic for 16 years. I looked around at these people I'd lived with my whole life and realized I didn't know them at all. They weren't just grieving parents and siblings. They were co-conspirators in a cover-up designed to hide the fact that their surviving son was responsible for their dead son's death. I need to get out of here, I said, heading for the basement stairs. "Danny, please," Mom called after me. "Don't leave like this. We can talk through this as a family." I stopped at the bottom of the stairs and turned back to look at them. Really look at them. For people who had spent 16 years crafting an elaborate lie to protect a child who had caused his twin brother's death. "Family," I said bitterly. "We haven't been a family since Michael died. We've been strangers living in the same house, pretending the past never happened." But even as I said it, I knew there was still one more secret they were keeping. I could see it in the way they looked at each other when they thought I wasn't paying attention. I drove aimlessly for hours after leaving my parents' house, trying to process everything I'd learned. My twin brother. The dare that killed him. The 16 years of lies and hidden guilt. But something was nagging at me, some detail that didn't quite fit. Finally, I found myself at the town library, a place I'd always gone when I needed to think. I sat in the same corner where I'd done homework throughout high school, staring out the window at the parking lot, trying to make sense of my fractured memories. That's when it hit me. Something Emma had said. "You watched the whole thing, Danny. You saw your twin brother drown." But if I had blocked out all memories of Michael due to trauma, how could I have selective memory loss? How could I remember the lake house, remember that summer, remember building sandcastles on the beach, but have no memory of my twin brother who was supposedly there the entire time? I pulled out my phone and called the lake house rental company. The same one my family had used every summer of my childhood. After some searching, the manager found our rental records going back 20 years. "The Williams family," she confirmed. "Yes, you folks rented the Blue Cottage every July for, let's see, about 8 years running. Family of 5, 2 adults and 3 children." 3 children? I asked. "Are you sure it wasn't 4? "Let me double-check," she said, and I heard papers shuffling. "No, definitely 3. I remember because you folks always requested the cottage with 3 bedrooms. One for the parents, one for the older daughter, and one for the younger twins." Younger twins. My heart was pounding. Yes, 2 girls. Sarah and Emma, I believe. Sweet kids. The boy was the oldest. That would be you, I assume. I hung up the phone with shaking hands. 2 girls. Emma and Sarah were twins, not Michael and me. But that couldn't be right. Emma was clearly older than Sarah, and neither of them looked anything alike. Unless. I called Emma directly. "We need to talk," I said when she answered. "Now." "Danny, I know you're upset, but—" "Emma, how old are you?" Silence. "What? How old are you? Your real age?" Another long pause. 21. "You know I'm 21. "No," I said slowly. "Sarah is 25. I'm 23. That would make you the youngest. But I've always thought Sarah was the younger twin sister. Why did I think you two were different ages?" "Danny, you're not making sense. You're upset about Michael and you're confusing." "There is no Michael." The words exploded out of me. "I just called the lake house. They have records going back 20 years. We were always a family of 5. 2 adults, 3 children. 1 boy, 2 girls. Emma, what the hell is going on?" When she spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. "Where are you?" "The library." "Stay there. I'm coming alone." She arrived 30 minutes later, and I barely recognized her. The confident, outgoing sister I'd known my entire life looked broken, aged beyond her years. She sat across from me at the library table where I'd been waiting, and for a long moment, neither of us spoke. "There never was a Michael, was there?" I finally asked. Emma closed her eyes and nodded. "There never was a Michael." "Then who, what?" I gestured helplessly at the impossibility of it all. "Sarah and I are twins," she said quietly. "Fraternal twins, born 2 minutes apart. I'm actually older than her, but when we were kids, I was always smaller, so everyone assumed Sarah was older. After a while, it was just easier to let people think that." But the photos. The birthday cake. All those memories Mom and Dad shared. Emma reached into her purse and pulled out one of the photographs I'd found in the attic. The one of two 7-year-old boys blowing out birthday candles. She set it on the table between us and pushed it toward me. "Look closer," she said. I picked up the photo and studied it carefully. The two boys looked identical, but now that I examined it more closely, I could see subtle differences. One boy, clearly me, was looking directly at the camera. The other boy was looking slightly to the left, and his smile seemed somehow off. "Photo manipulation," Emma said. "Dad's been good with computers since the early 2000s. He scanned old photos of you from different angles, flipped and duplicated them, created composite images. The birthday cake photo? That was your 8th birthday. Dad added the Michael to the frosting digitally." I stared at her in disbelief. "Why? Why would you all do this?" Emma's eyes filled with tears. "Because you were so lonely, Danny. You were always so lonely." "What are you talking about? Growing up, you were always different from other kids. You had trouble making friends, you preferred to play alone, you talked to imaginary friends constantly. But it wasn't just normal childhood imagination. You created this elaborate fantasy twin brother named Michael, and you talked about him like he was real." The library seemed to tilt around me. "I created Michael? You were convinced you had a twin brother. You would set places for him at dinner, save half your toys for him, introduce him to teachers at school. It was concerning. Mom and Dad took you to child psychologists, but you were so insistent that Michael was real." "But the lake house story, the drowning. That was real, in a way. When you were 7, we did go to that lake house. And you did have a traumatic experience there. But it wasn't watching your twin brother drown." Emma wiped her eyes. "You almost drowned, Danny. You went swimming alone while the rest of us were having lunch, and you got caught in those underwater weeds. Dad found you and pulled you out, unconscious. You were in the hospital for 3 days. I felt like I was falling through space. But afterward, I stopped talking about Michael. Yes, but not because you forgot him due to trauma. The near-drowning experience seemed to, I don't know how to explain it, ground you in reality. You stopped talking about Michael. You stopped insisting he was real. We thought you'd outgrown the imaginary friend phase. So why create all this fake evidence? Why the photos, the stories, the elaborate deception?" Emma looked away. "Because last month, you started asking about him again." The words hit me like a thunderbolt. "What? You don't remember, do you? 3 weeks ago, you called Mom crying, saying you'd had dreams about your twin brother Michael. You said you were starting to remember things about him, and you wanted to know why we never talked about him anymore." I had no memory of this conversation, but as Emma spoke, fragments began floating back. Vivid dreams of a boy who looked like me. The persistent feeling that someone was missing from our family photos. The growing certainty that there was something important my family wasn't telling me. "Mom panicked," Emma continued. "She called a family meeting, without you, and we decided to give you what you needed. We thought if we created evidence of Michael, let you discover the truth about what happened to him, it would help you process whatever was causing these dreams and memories." "You thought you were helping me by lying to me?" "We thought we were helping you by giving you closure on a fantasy that was becoming real to you again. The plan was to let you grieve for Michael, and then hopefully, you could finally let him go." I sat in stunned silence, trying to process the magnitude of their deception. My entire family had collaborated to create an elaborate fake history, complete with fabricated photos and manufactured memories, all to help me cope with the return of an imaginary friend from my childhood. "Danny," Emma said softly, "there's something else. Something that made us realize we had to do this. There's more. The dreams you were having about Michael, you weren't just dreaming about him as a child. You were dreaming about him growing up alongside you. Adult Michael. Michael at your high school graduation, Michael at family dinners, Michael as your roommate in college. In your dreams, he never died at 7. He grew up with you. The truth hit me like a physical blow. I hadn't just been remembering a dead twin brother. I had been unconsciously creating an entire alternate life where my imaginary childhood friend had continued to exist, continued to grow up alongside me. The family meeting, I said slowly, when you all decided to create this elaborate lie, you weren't trying to help me grieve. You were trying to kill him. Kill Michael. Make him officially dead so I would stop dreaming about him being alive. Emma nodded, fresh tears streaming down her face. We were scared, Danny. These weren't just childhood fantasies anymore. You were talking about Michael like he was real, like he had been there for your entire life. We didn't know what else to do. I looked around the library, at the familiar surroundings that suddenly felt foreign and strange. Everything I thought I knew about my family, about myself, about my life, had been built on a foundation of lies designed to manage my mental health. There's just one problem with your plan, I said quietly. What? I pulled out my phone and showed her the screen, a text message I'd received that morning, while I was in my parents' attic discovering the truth about Michael. The message was from an unknown number, and it read, Danny, it's me. We need to talk. I'll explain everything when I see you. Meet me at the old tree fort behind the Henderson house at midnight tonight. Emma's face went white as she read the message. Either Michael is real, I said, standing up from the library table, or I'm losing my mind completely. Either way, I'm going to find out tonight. As I walked away, leaving Emma sitting alone among the lies our family had constructed, I realized that the brother everyone forgot might not have been forgotten at all. He might have been waiting, all these years, for the right moment to come home. The question was I ready to meet him?